Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for tuning in. Have you ever wondered about the importance of representation in healthcare? A recent article in Timely MD shows that Black patients have better results when Black healthcare workers treat them. And because there is a direct correlation between health and wealth, representation in healthcare leads to better health and fewer medical bills. In other words, increased diversity in medicine with more Black doctors means more Black lives are saved and the racial wealth gap shrinks. Colleges and universities can be part of the solution by promoting Black representation in mental health services and considering these initiatives. You might also be wondering what this has to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion. That illustrates that healthcare organizations have a growing responsibility to improve diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts for their employees, practitioners, and serve patients and their families better. Our lead experts this afternoon will expand on this further. We are so excited to have you all here today. This conversation is going to be on fire. I am looking forward to all of you meeting my podcast guests. We value your feedback and opinions. Please drop them in the chat. We intend to respond to as many comments and questions from our audience. This takes a great deal of effort to pull off, so I am eternally grateful to all my loyal guests and my audience. Every week, we create new content and look forward to subscribing to our YouTube channel to keep up with us. My name is Rochelle Carrier, and I'm a DEI consultant and authoress of Emotional Intelligence, a toolkit for managing diversity, equity, and inclusion. The link to purchase the book will be in the comments at the end of the show. For a living, I help thought-provoking leaders implement DEI plans and reframe their cultural mindsets through thought-provoking workshops and webinars. Join us as we always continue to share the different voices in the space. Today, we have women trailblazers in our virtual summit with superpowers in the medical health landscape. Thank you all, ladies, for tuning in. Ladies, welcome. So I am so happy to all have you here. I wanted to allow all of you the occasion to welcome yourselves in your distinct way. We want to get to know you and how we can genuinely connect with you. Dr. Kerwin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and to meet all the women on the panel.
How would you be able to tell us something a little bit about what you do and how you can introduce us to let the audience know who you are and how we can connect with you?
Sure, no problem. So my name is Dr. Michelle Kerwin. I am a pediatrician. I have been a pediatrician for almost 20 years, or practicing for almost 20 years. I'm located in Miami, Florida, and I've been in the South Florida area for my entire career. I'm also the chief medical officer at a federally qualified health center in Miami Gardens specifically, and I've been here for 9 years. I did my medical school at the University of Miami and my residency at Jackson Memorial Hospital. I don't know if that's all you want.
Thank you. Yes, I was on mute. Thank you so much, Michelle. And Dr. Jacqueline Duget, if you can, let the audience know how we can, genuinely connect with you and a little bit about yourself.
Thank you very much, Rochelle. I'm excited to be here with all these wonderful ladies, especially on National Women's International Day. So I'm Dr. Jacqueline Duget. I'm a pediatrician as well as Dr. Kerwin, practicing for about 20 years. I trained at Rutgers. It's now Rutgers Medical School. And currently, you can connect with me on social media. I'm at Dr. Jacqueline Duget on Instagram, Dr. Duget on Twitter, and I also have a media company that really centers and celebrates Black families, children, and youth. It's called What is Black? And you can reach me on my website, whatisblack.co, or social media at What is Black, WHATISBLK. So excited to have this conversation.
Oh, so excited to have you. And Dr. Lopes, welcome to the stage. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Dr. Ana Sofia Lopes. I'm a family physician. I'm based currently in California. I did train in Miami with roots in New England. I went to medical school in Boston. I currently work in an urgent care, but the majority of my life's work has been in the primary care arena, doing primary care, family medicine for families. And I was on the front lines during the COVID-19 pandemic. And you can reach me on Instagram at Dr. Ana Sofia Lopes.
Thank you so much, Anna. And Dr. Doucet, welcome. Thank you so much for coming today.
Oh, you're so welcome. Sorry about that. I didn't know my phone was on. Yes, I am so happy to be here. I am an anesthesiologist practicing in Los Angeles. I trained went to medical school at UCLA, trained at Cornell New York Hospital. I came back to Los Angeles to practice. And my thing is, besides practicing anesthesiology, I did a lot of advocacy work. I was a founder of Director of Women in Medicine. So we did a lot of diversity and inclusion work through that program and advocacy. So I'm excited to be here. And behind me is one of the motivating things that I keep making sure that I remember about Martin Luther King. And as he says, of all the forms of inequality and injustice in healthcare is the most shocking and inhumane. And he said that back in 1966 at a committee for human services, medical committee for human services. And guess what? We still have that problem today. And so that's what we're here talking about. And we're trying to make a difference. So I am happy and pleased to be here.
I can't. Oh, thank you so much. I can't wait to dive in. And my co-host, welcome, Tammy Triolo. Thank you so much. You make life so much easier since you've joined us. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. I am Tammy. I am now Rochelle's co-host. I am founder and owner of PCQ Consulting, and what we do is DEI initiatives around unconscious bias. And so I'm happy to be here, and I'm incredibly impressed by the panel today. I think I've worked in healthcare for about 15 years, and I've never been in a room with this many beautiful, Black, and accomplished doctors. So I am thrilled to be here.
Thank you so much. Ladies, let's dive in. Please describe your current healthcare landscape. So now what I mean by current healthcare landscape, it usually represents a place designed to promote good health and well-being. Dr. Kerwin?
What specifically do you want to know? Like the area that I work in, or
the area that you work in?
Okay. So the community that I work in is actually an underserved community. That's what federally qualified health centers, that's who they are here to serve. So it targets a population with a certain, that is below the poverty level, certain amount of the community is above the age of 65. There's certain perinatal and prenatal health disparities in the area. So this is the type of area, also a health professional shortage area in the number of physicians to community members. And so this is the type of area that federally qualified health centers serve. So this is where I've been for the last 9 years, and serving an underserved community, basically.
Right. What are the challenges that you're experiencing right now?
I think the biggest challenge, do you mean for me personally, or for the patients?
For the patients.
For the patients, we have a large amount of uninsured patients. And so that is one of our biggest challenges taking care of them. It's hard for them to get basic preventive care like colon cancer screens, mammograms, those types of things. Even just basic preventative well checks and labs cost money. And even though we do have a sliding scale and we are able to better accommodate our patients financially, sometimes it's still a struggle. We also serve patients that are here in the country legally. And so that is a difficult thing as well, because they're not trusting of the system and not trusting that they won't be discovered and, sent back to their country, but we serve anyone regardless of ability to pay, ability of status in the United States, anything. You're able to come to a federally qualified health center. That's one of the good things about working in community health. But we still face those challenges. Okay, we are able to see anybody, but we still have to pay our bills, so there still has to be some degree of financial reimbursement, and that can be very difficult for our patients. That and accessing the care that they
need. Ladies, I want to be able to tell you that you can all chime in whenever you want. It's a round table, and I want you to be able to contribute to the conversation. So I called on Dr. Kerwin, but I want everybody else to feel comfortable to chime in and to add on to the conversation. Be as comfortable as you want.
I saw Anna raising her hand with something that I said.
Yeah, I think so. When I think about the healthcare landscape, I think this is what resonates for most of us as Black women physician. And I'm speaking from my lens in primary care, urgent care. But I think once I kind of talk about all the concepts that have influenced our healthcare industry, right? Because it is a money-making machine. There's no free lunch, as Dr. Kerwin just mentioned. We've had the patient-centered medical home, which is tying services with the patient at the center. We've changed our mantra to think about physician wellness so that we decrease burnout symptoms in doctors, so we can have doctors at the helm to practice medicine. Lately, most of you have had the opportunity to see the advancements we've achieved with leveraging telehealth that were kind of forced upon us by the pandemic. And then the COVID-19 pandemic itself and the televised murder of George Floyd dramatically changed our environment. Before COVID-19, we all knew that healthcare disparities were happening in pediatrics and in adult medicine and anesthesiology, and it was glaring. But when the pandemic hit and we saw the death rates that showed that Black and Brown people were dying from COVID-19 at alarming rates that was disproportionate to their white counterparts, or to their population. There were only 14% of the population Blacks make up in this country. It caused us to pause. The healthcare system took a pause and examined the reasons why. Initially, in the beginning of the pandemic, about 2 years ago at this time, a little earlier, most of us thought that this was a rich person's disease because we only saw people that were traveling, going to Europe, could afford to do those types of things, and then they would come back with COVID-19. One of the earliest celebrities was Tom Hanks, who got COVID. So Black and Brown communities thought they were immune. But unfortunately, we all know COVID doesn't discriminate. And so these communities were vulnerable to a higher disease burden. And because George Floyd's murder was televised, and it moved so many courageous people from all walks of life to declare in the streets that Black lives matter, Black doctors matter, that caused a shift in our healthcare landscape. And since the history of medicine is tainted with ill-conceived notions about Black bodies being inferior, there's just been an outpouring and a realignment of corporate values in medicine. And many institutions put out allyship statements, supporting Black Lives Matters. And they also put up significant dollars to make sure that we continue the work to eliminate healthcare disparities in pediatrics, like Dr. Kerwin does, and in adult medicine, like we all practice.
I was going to ask a follow-up to what Dr. Curran said about being federally funded and the challenge of you're serving an underserved community, people who don't have the ability to pay. So my question is to you, how can the community, the Black community, Brown community, white communities, those of us who are insured and have more means, how can we support your practice? Or can we do that if you're a federally funded facility?
I mean, we're a federally funded facility, so some of our dollars, most of our dollars, or many of our dollars come from the federal government. But we are a nonprofit agency. We do accept like that. But, I don't know that it always translates that those dollars that come in go directly to patients. So we partner with a lot of, a few, I should say, organizations. For instance, FIU, Florida International University, has a mammogram, so we can get free screening mammograms for our patients. There are other free programs for colonoscopies, and other like labs, especially STD screening, things like that. Try to partner with organizations, but it's a piecemeal sort of effort. It's a little bit here, a little bit this patient, but we do our best to be able to do that, so that patients can get the basic care. We were written into a grant with the Jasmine Project at the University of Miami, and it is aimed at addressing disparities in perinatal health. So through that program, we speak with I speak with the mothers of my patients, and I'm able to look at their health, do a questionnaire with them. They're able to get free vitamins, a gift card. They're able to see our dietitian one-on-one for free, and also do her Zoom class. And if they don't have insurance, they're able to get a free initial visit with our family doctor, free basic labs, including STD screenings, a free pap smear, and a free flu vaccine. So we have many different initiatives like that. And so dollars coming in can help go to those, or we can work with your grant programs and things like that. That's our biggest way to try to address our uninsured population.
And hopefully somebody's watching that can partner with your practice to be able to do that.
The Center for Family and Child Enrichment in Miami Gardens, also doing business as the Pediatric and Family Health and Wellness.
Awesome. Hopefully we get that message out today, because I know that federally funded facilities, it is a struggle because of the population that you are serving. So any way that people can help assist, not just your practice, but the people that you're serving in that practice, would be helpful. And hopefully we get some of that out of this talk today.
Yeah. I just wanted to say, in my landscaping, we do have the demographics of a lot of Black and Latinos in the area that I practice. And even though we are a HMO, we still see some of the social determinants of health, the healthcare disparities. And I'll give you an example. So one of our patients was seen by, sorry about that, my husband's talking, was seen by a Black physician and had been seen by multiple white physicians previously. And on their problem list, it said that the patient was non-compliant with drugs. So basically, they ended up not taking care of themselves, not taking their medication, but she was able to ascertain, why he wasn't, because he ended up in the emergency room, and she's like, you're going to die. You're not taking your medication. You're going to die from this cardiac problem. So he confided in her. He trusted her. And she found out that he wasn't taking the medication because he could not afford it. Now, even though he had the insurance didn't pay for the medication. It may have paid a small part. So he didn't have enough money to pay for it. So she was able to connect him to a program to pay for his medication. And that's an example of two things. It's an example of one of the social determinants of health, economic issues. The other example is racism or bias, whatever you want to call it, because those previous physicians just said, oh, well, he's just non-compliant, but that wasn't true. That wasn't the full story. So she was able to ascertain that. And I think as a Black physician, you may be more trusted, you may have more empathy and ask more questions. So she was able to get that off of his list as a diagnosis, non-compliant, when the real issue was lack of money. And that's one of the big determinants of the social determinants of health. Now, there's quite a few of them. So I just wanted to bring that up as one of the examples that you can see. And the other ones that, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead, Dr. Disa.
I was just giving another example of some of the racism, of course, is with pain medications, where they aren't giving Black patients pain medications when they compare it to the white patients for the same problems. And that's well known, and it's documented multiple times. So there is biasness going on with that as well. In fact, the other day I was on a call with some pre-medical students, pre-medical Black women students, and she was complaining because she had just had a major orthopedic surgery. Okay. And they didn't even want to give her medication. So she had suffered for 3 days. And she said, you know what? I'm out of here because you guys will not treat my pain. So I'm leaving the hospital. So finally, when she told him she's leaving, that's when they decided to treat her pain. But that's a well-known issue. And the last one I want to mention, example that you can relate to, is with the peripheral vascular disease with these patients, that the biasness, racism that occurs with that, instead of revascularizing the leg, they're more likely to just cut off the lower part of the leg instead of revascularizing. They're more likely to revascularize if you're a white patient. Now, that has nothing to do with insurance. That's a decision that somebody made. And those type of things need to be worked on. People need to be trained about racism, about unconscious bias and conscious bias. Unconscious bias, you can be biased against anything, race, age, gender, but you're not aware that you're biased. Conscious bias means you're selectively deciding.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So now, and that's her expertise.
It is. Yes.
It's I'm glad you're on here, because that's one of the things we can do.
Yeah.
We need to do the training. We need to take care of that to decrease the racism that goes on. There's a lot of social determinants of health, and I'm so glad that they're finally looking at them, because previously, I've been practicing for 30 years, they just kept looking at, we have increase in everything: hypertension, diabetes, cardiovascular, asthma, all of that. And that what they said in the past was, oh, it's their genetics. That's why they have more problems. Instead, we find out there's more to that story. It's not just genetics. It's these social determinants that are affecting us. Our economic status, our health care access, all of that, education, there's so many different components to that.
Dr. Duget, I see you shaking your head.
Oh, okay. I think all of it is.
I'm sorry, it just gets me excited. Like, well, I'm just glad they finally recognize that
Right.
it's not just genetics. There is, we have barriers that are going on, so there's more to the story: racism, education, lack of employment, lack of healthcare access or underinsured. There's just the lack of social support network. And it's not just education and public awareness for the patients, but it's the fact that the doctors need to change. They need training. They need policies that make them have some training for this.
Right. And Jacqueline, I see you shaking your head. What were you thinking as she was stating this? What do you want to add?
Regarding the healthcare landscape, I think, what all the other speakers have said are so true. But I think it's interesting, right? Having had the opportunity to work both in public health as well as in private practice, what I'm seeing with the changing of the healthcare landscape is that there's sort of this merging of the two, right? They're not necessarily siloed anymore, right? Because when we talk about the healthcare system, we tend to think more about, patient interaction, one-on-one patient interactions. And as Dr. Doucette was mentioning, right, this whole public health sort of lens that we're taking and trying to address some of these ills in our healthcare system, and it starts with declarations such as declaring racism a public health crisis, right? And by doing that and leaning into the fact that racism and structural racism has this long history and all these things that impact a patient's health, that's vital, because if we don't acknowledge those things, then we'll continue to do the same things that are perpetuating these poor health outcomes, right? It's not just having access to a health insurance card, right? You have to be able to have a provider that will take that health insurance card, whether it's private or public. What are the co-pays? Does that person have a living having a living wage to be able to afford the medications or the other additional healthcare services that are required in order for them to maintain their health, the environment? So I think all that Dr. Doucette said was so vital. I think what's also important is that it's cross-cutting, right? Even people that we think have means, they're still impacted.
Yep.
But if you don't address those that are the most marginalized, then you won't have, true access and true optimal health care for everyone, because you can't leave people out and say that, it's just like, if there's a spill, right? If there's a leak if you want to, you can't just fix one area of the leak without looking at the whole pipeline, right? You're going to continue to have leaks. You're going to continue to have problems that will eventually build up. So I think it's so important that we really think about healthcare landscape more globally and more systemically if we want to address disparities.
Yeah.
Before we get any further, Dr. Kerwin, one of our guests asked this question, and she wanted to know, do you collaborate on an interstate level for your practice?
Interstate level?
I'm assuming they're in another state. How can they support you if they're from another state in your practice?
Oh, that's a very good question. I mean, we do collaborate interstate, but more so with other community members. And I think the only way that I can really think of, I mean, aside from, I think everybody's having problems right now with hiring. If we need to hire more staff and more culturally competent staff. But aside from that, I think, monetary donations that can help us institute programs that address the disparities, that address the challenges and barriers that our patients face, whether the social determinants of health or other, but basically that's our biggest way is finding the programs, finding the money to institute the programs to give better care and to give more access to free basic preventive care as best that we can.
Yeah. I think something else that everyone who's watching this podcast can do, regardless of where you live, is get out and vote. Look at your candidates and see what kind of healthcare system or model they're supporting. A lot of these federally qualified health centers don't have the dollars behind them because of policies. And so we essentially have a say in that as citizens, as voting citizens. So that's something that's very important that everyone can do, regardless of where you live, is check your record, your politician's record on what their healthcare policy is.
Yeah, that's a great point, Anna. And in that a lot of time to vote midterms or the general elections, I'm pushing as much as possible. My patients, please go out and vote, please go out and vote. And there's a lack of knowledge and a lack of education about voting, about who are what they stand for, what their platforms are. So I think that's an excellent point and an excellent way to affect change in our healthcare system and to address the disparities.
Right. It's interesting. I hear so many topics that we can expand on, but I want to make sure that for our audience, if you can tell us what role do Black and Brown physicians play in healthcare and the importance it is to have someone of representation who is going to be our doctor. How does that look like for a patient? Because at the beginning of the show, I said that, with health comes wealth. So if you're healthy, you can work. And then, the gaps are smaller and smaller. How does that play in healthcare when we have representation?
So, go ahead, Dr. Lips.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I think on so many different levels, Black and Brown physicians are vital. I mean, there's data that show that when there's concordance, when the provider looks like the patient, right, there's more compliance, right? Also, I mean, there's even been some studies about even the impact having Black and Brown physicians on even during the neonatal period, right, when the child is born, and decreasing poor birth outcomes. So we're vital. And also there's data that shows that we're more likely to work in areas that are underserved, right? And unfortunately, in many areas that are underserved, they're disproportionately populated by Black and Brown people. So we do a lot, but we must also make the point that there are not enough of us, right? We only make up of maybe 5 to 6%. And if you want to parse that out, Black male physicians, only like 2%. I mean, there's been an increase. So when you think, and I think the other physicians will talk about this, when you talk about policies that make it harder for us to be represented, right? If we're 5% and we make up 13 or 14% of the population, we're not even representative of the overall population. And just one last point, unfortunately, you know, I think many of us, right, because we know of the disparities, we're very vocal in standing up for policies or maybe representing ourselves on committees, but there's also a toll to that as well. So it'll be interesting to talk about that as well. You know, the fact that we stand up and we talk about these things, but there's also, you know, this idea of this minority tax, right? There's an extra burden put on us for this work that needs to be discussed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's so great, because if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, they say, right? So the more of us that are at the table, the more of us that can make a difference. I'm talking about at the policy level and also just direct care with patients. So the California Medical Association, they actually have a committee that is working on racism as a public health crisis, changing policy. And so that committee is working on that side of it. But, you know, there's associations that work, Association of Black Women Physicians, which myself and Ann are in. We support Black women that are pre-medical. We have a program, Sister to Sister, to help them in their journey. We also support them with scholarships. So that is what our committee does to help with the diversity piece of it. But outside of that, they also have association here called AIM that works with changing policy with maternal infant mortality here in California as well. So there's different venues and different things going on, but all the sectors need to come together. We also educate. That's another big part of it. But again, there's only so much, as she said, we can do. And the bigger our group is, the more we'll be able to do more. And the more that we get into leadership roles, the more effective we will be with policy. So these are some of the things that I think will make a difference by increasing the diversity of the physicians and increasing the numbers.
Yeah.
Right.
I think we're all on the same page in you know, raising the mantra representation matters. And if Black boys and girls do not see enough of us, then they don't realize that these careers can be for them. And we really want to push the STEM careers in our children, right? Because they're going to pick up the baton and carry this legacy and this work forward. Like Dr. Duche mentioned, there's only 2.5% of the physicians in America are Black women. And it's only like 2% are Black men. And here's the atrocity in all of that. The number hasn't increased since the 1970s. So there are less Black men applying to medical school now than there was in the 70s. So this is a national crisis. We're trying to get ahead of it and talk about diversity, really asking the medical schools to look at a holistic approach when they're looking at their candidates. And we're also moms, and you know, we had to pivot in the pandemic and become educators. And like Dr. Duche and Dr. Doucette talked about, we also have the minority tax because we're trying to advocate for our patients at the same time when we're the ones also experiencing the microaggressions and the racism and the sexism in the workplace. So it's a very difficult role for Black and Brown women physicians, but it's so important. And all of us feel like we must keep, you know, we have to be there to make sure that we are advocating appropriately for our patients, like Dr. Kerwin said.
And can I add, I think when patients see Black and Brown doctors, it gives them a sense of confidence to actually speak up about what their medical issues are. I was telling Rochelle at the beginning that I have children that are mixed race, but melanin in their skin. And 2 of them had like a skin issue. And the pediatrician at the time was a white doctor. And I knew I was not getting what was needed done for my children's skin. So when I took my children back, I specifically asked for a Black or brown physician that understands people that have melanin in their skin, which means the skin conditions we have may show up differently. And I think when you have a doctor who looks like you or come from a culture that's you, you feel more empowered to speak up and really address issues that you may not have been comfortable addressing with your white or other physicians. And that's why I think it's so important that you women are in this field. And I get it's a lonely field. I was doing nurse staffing for a long time. And I'm telling you, I've never been in a room with this many Black women doctors all at one time. And even placing Black nurses was a challenge because they would go into hospitals and have microaggressions with them all the time. And so I really salute you women, because I've been in healthcare a long time. I know the challenges you face. I truly understand the challenges you guys face. And I am so grateful for every single one of you.
Thank you.
You know, for me, I'm a physician myself, and I choose to have a Black woman OBGYN doctor. Why? Because I feel safer. I know that their heart is in it and that they're going to try to see things from my perspective. And I just feel that they're just going to do better work for me. And I'm a physician, so
Yeah.
I can't even
Right.
imagine what happens to other people out there. And I
Right.
want to say that's with the physician diversity issue, that's why I chose to be on the admissions committee for one of the medical schools. So I am part of an admissions committee for one of the medical schools because I want to make sure that our Black students, you know, are heard and get the opportunity to go to medical school. And that was the reason that I took the time to apply and compete for a position on a medical school admissions committee.
Right. It's interesting because I think racism also deprives our nation of, right, the scientific and medical community of the full breadth of talent to address the racial and ethnic health disparities. So, how does that affect us?
Well, that's so funny. I read about, I was like really sad to hear, but I was so glad that they figured it out. Citigroup found that we lost $16 trillion because of racism over the last 20 years. And they looked at wages, education, investment in Black businesses, the housing market. And they said that if we close that gap, then we would get an increase in our gross domestic product for the US of 6% by closing the gap. So the country would do better if that happened. They also found it with the McKinsey report.
Right.
So by closing the gap, we're just going to help the whole country, and because all our talents will be supported, and education wise, business wise, so housing market wise, investing. I think that was so awesome that those two researchers found that out.
And in a capitalist society, it's about money, right? It's always going to be about money, unfortunately. Somebody in our show asked how this question came up about how are we addressing the approach to healthcare for trans and non-binary individuals, especially in the Black and Brown community?
I mean, we have a long way to go. We're not where we should be. There never should have been a gap in the first place, but unfortunately, this is where we are. So we do recognize that our trans and our non-binary people have not gotten the proper care. They also don't feel comfortable coming into the setting. They're not accessing the services that they can. We have made changes to the medical record to have patients self-identify as transgender, non-binary, and that will also help us because once we start to just get data and have the conversations, we can kind of move forward. I know one area where that we're still lacking is in terms of HIV treatment and care and prevention. Since the beginning of the epidemic, the HIV epidemic 40 years ago, we have a new medication called PrEP, which is pre-exposure prophylaxis, which is available to anyone, everyone. You don't have to be trans. It doesn't matter what sexual orientation you are, but physicians are not having the conversation with their patients about this medication. And there's several other things that physicians are not having conversations about that we are desperately trying to educate our population and the physicians at the same time, so that we don't have these gaps in care, and so that we can kind of eliminate and get back to a healthier society.
Yeah.
So it is a work in progress, but
Right.
we do recognize that we can do better.
I
Right.
think additionally, bias training is something that
Right.
needs to occur because there's bias against those people
Trans,
as well. So what they need to do is physicians need training for it. They have testing to figure out that you have biases and there's way to mitigate biases. So that needs to be a policy and a guideline for medical school training and also for physicians in practice now. And that is something that is condoned by California Medical Association and other people as well.
Right. You know,
But I think that's-
go
I was gonna
ahead.
say, sorry, Rachel. I think just to follow up as well, I mean, when we talk really about the healthcare system, we have to look at, I mean, policies that may not overtly seem, have racism or bias in them, right? When they're conceived and then when they're implemented. But when you look at right now, for many facilities where you're working with individuals who have context, right? Whether or not they can afford, whether or not their mental health issues. I mean, all these other things that come into the office, right, with the person. When we look at the amount of time we're allotted to spend with patients, right? If you're only allotted 10 minutes, 15 minutes to see a patient, okay, that's already, you got to think about like what the policy is going to impact other communities disproportionately. When we have, some of our health systems and our practices have late policies, right? So if you're 20 minutes late, then you can't see the patient or, move to another day. And maybe that's the only day that family or that person can come. So again, all those things come into play, even though, again, I agree with the unconscious bias training, but I think we also really have to look at a racial equity lens and the policies that are created in their implementation and how those impact how we can treat patients and care for patients and coordinate care to better serve them.
Awesome point.
The
additional question was, do you think physicians have the educational language to talk to trans, gay, and non-binary people? Do we need additional training on language?
Yes.
Dr. Kerwin?
Dr. Kerwin.
Was saying, I think the lack of knowledge is there's a significant lack of knowledge. I actually had a conversation with one of my staff who's in her 20s. I'm not in my 20s. And she was educating me about the different terms, and you have to use they instead of he or she. And it was, majority of it was completely new to me. And it made me realize that, I have to educate myself. So just as a Black, non-brown physician may need to educate themselves on cultural practices of a Black or brown person, I need to educate myself in the same way so that I don't have, I don't provide a barrier, or, maybe the patient won't be as comfortable with me if they understand transgender, et cetera. So I actually I haven't completed it, but I started just an online course about transgender and the different the terminology, non-binary, et cetera, just to be better educated. Because, as much as I can talk about racial bias and structural racism and so on, I have to also be able to be fluent in these things as well, because it provides a barrier to care if you're not culturally sensitive to their needs.
We stand an accountable doctor. Love that.
It's really interesting because I think like Lexi was saying, it's very important to have that communication and the language, and to be able to constantly teach ourselves and re-educate ourselves. And like Dr. Kerwin was saying, I'm also not in my 20s. And I think what happens is that we need to constantly stay abreast of of what is going on around us, and have some emotional intelligence within us to be able to open up and have those courageous conversations and realize that it's going to make a big difference in somebody else's life. So Lex August also says, she says, would you say that there needs to be educational about language and communication? Yeah, we already discussed that. So what do you think are the challenges for being Black and brown as physicians? What are your challenges?
You go first, Anna.
I see her smiling.
For me, I have a personal story, and I shared it with some of the panelists. I think, while we're on the front lines and we have to experience the pandemic that we did, we had to pivot successfully, right, for our Black and brown children at home to be successful and help them overcome their structural obstacles. And then we have to coexist with the system that has been racist and sexist. And we too have experienced that racism and sexism, and we have to navigate very carefully to support our communities. And that's been the challenge for me. My story is kind of fresh, but I'll share it in case it helps someone else. I've been with an institution for significant years, definitely over a decade. I have a proven track record of excellence where my metrics were at the top, not near the top, the top. And when it came time for a promotion, which I had negotiated into my contract, my supervisor did not think I was qualified. And I was just taken aback that it was even a question that I was not qualified to take the next step in my career and take on this promotion. And it's caused me to shift directions in the company. It really made me look at my values and what was important. And really what they were asking me to do is catch a falling knife, which I wasn't going to do. It's not safe. I'm going to let that drop and reassess. And then I had to turn my back on the opportunity that, clearly had significant dollars tied to it that I rightfully earned. And I honestly believe that if I had an ally or a sponsor who looked like me, if my workplace truly valued diversity and looked at my candidacy and all of my contributions, I've led DEI initiatives, I've led patient education initiatives, I've led the patient-centered medical home. On a scale of 1 to 10, I'm a 15 as far as patient advocacy. I've done work with the Black women physicians. So I really don't think that my leader knew who I was. And in such, he made a decision that, that is what it is. So, we have to navigate those things. And there's economic repercussions, there's social repercussions to all of us. And still, I have to get up, put on my white coat, and
do the work.
See my patients and do the work.
Yeah.
And psychological.
Yeah.
And
Right.
stress.
Yeah. It's a lot of stress too. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I think it's happened to all of us, and I think that's my frustration too, where you're highly qualified to do a leadership role, and you are not considered, and you're denied it. In fact, it was real interesting because I applied for something, and it wasn't even a huge position, but somebody said, my gosh, your resume looks like you should be the medical director. You should be a CEO, all the stuff on your resume. But that didn't even happen for the small position.
Wow.
But, it's just the bias and sometimes microaggressions. In fact, there's a whole article in our medical group about women and microaggressions in the operating room, which is where I am, anesthesiologist operating room, that have been against the women at our facility in a JAMA, which is like a important medical journal. But I continue to do the work I do because I told you about, I'm motivated. It's, if there's a vision for us to stand and help make a difference despite things that may be going on with us individually, I try to keep the big picture, and my why is to make a difference in this healthcare inequality. Like he said, it's shocking and inhumane. So that just makes me say, hey, I'm going to keep going, no matter what. And I'm going to just try to do what I can to make a difference for the future generations of Black physicians, for my patients, and anybody else that is coming along trying to help in this cause of the inequities and injustices going on with Black people.
And we
Right.
thank you.
Yeah, we do thank you. I find it interesting also from a patient perspective, and a little story that I'll share. I remember when I had high blood pressure, and I remember going into the number one hospital in this state and in New York, and I realized that a lot of the questions I had, again, this is what we were discussing, were being dismissed. So my questions were being dismissed. And every time I went back to see the doctor, I had questions, I had facts, I had statistics, and then they were being dismissed. And I was constantly being sent back home. And then finally, again, my blood pressure shot through the roof, and I was 5 months pregnant. And I went to the hospital, and right away he said, well, you need to have a C-section. And based on the research I had done, the C-section was it was too early for my daughter, whose lungs were still being formed. And there were 5 doctors in this group. And I remember him saying, well, what is it that you do for a living? And I said, I'm a teacher. He's like, do you always tell people what to do? And I said, no. I said, actually, I delegate. I said, a lot of the students in my class do the same thing I do. I let them come and teach. I let them, answer questions or ask questions. And I let them lead the group as well. I'm not the only person who's leading the classroom. And I said, at this time, I don't think it's safe for myself and my daughter to have the C-section. And very, very, very upset, walks out of the room, and I'm left by myself for 5 hours in this room. Don't know where he went, if he's coming back. Finally, he comes back. And what is it that you wish to do? And I said, I wish to be discharged, because based on the aggression that I feel from you, I no longer feel safe being under your care.
Wow.
And I remember calling my husband at the time, and I said, what are we going to do? And he said, I want to see the discharge papers. We're going to send them to the lawyer. He's going to read them, and he'll let us know what to do. So within minutes, he said, discharge yourself. We're going to see another doctor. So he comes back, and I signed the paper to be discharged. And he said, oh, this hospital is the number one hospital in the nation. And if I discharge myself, then I risk. Now, this is where it was very interesting, because he felt that I was going, and scientifically, he could have been right, but intuitively, I felt that it's not something that I could have handled at that time. So, you risk your life, and, you won't be able to come back to this hospital. And I said, are you telling me that if I come back, you will not give me health care? And then he stopped. And I said, this is where I feel comfortable. I'm going to discharge myself. So fast forward 4 months, I saw another doctor who was representative of me, who gave me things to do that I needed to do at home to keep, the blood pressure at bay and to not worry. And there was more sympathy and empathy, and in conversing. But, when you think that you're a patient and you advocating for yourself and to have this banter back and forth with a medical practitioner who obviously he knew better than me, but I also felt that it wasn't a time for me to go through such a heavy surgery and to risk, my daughter. Yeah.
Yeah, that sort of story that really hurts my heart. I'm going to tell you, it
Right.
hurts my heart because number one, he didn't listen to you from the beginning. He wasn't listening to you. You weren't being heard.
Right.
So he was like invalidating you, dismissing you, gaslighting you. It's just really sad. And he didn't need to do that. And then he had nerve to also threaten you. It's just those are the things that lead to toxic stress. And that's one of the things that they said actually increases the morbidity and mortality with Black women when they're pregnant. The toxic stress makes a difference. And, I'm just sad that he added to your trauma. It's just, and then you're like, these are the stories you hear. And it wasn't that you didn't have insurance. No, you had insurance. You had good insurance. But it's still happened. It's racism. It's just really sad.
I agree with Roberta, Rochelle. That sounds awful. My heart breaks just to have any woman who's bringing life in a vulnerable position to not feel cared for during that special time when your body's performing a miracle. And, unfortunately, despite our superpower status as a country, we are failing Black mothers, and our maternal morbidity and mortality rate is atrocious. It's a national disaster. And we've even seen it with Beyonce, who had preeclampsia during her delivery. So fame can't save us. And Serena, when she had I think it was her pulmonary embolism, money and fame can't save us. And the studies do show that Black women, even when things are equal, you're educated, you have insurance, the racism still rears its ugly head. So this is a big problem. And, we really need to get ahead of it and address it.
I was about to say, I think that's one of the reasons why, too, Black women, the birth morbidity rate is so high in Black women. I think it was my second child. I remember being put in what was no bigger than a closet that I thought was just a waiting room for me to get to a room. And the nurse walks in and she says, "No, you're having your baby here." And I'm like, I'm absolutely not having my child in a closet. And I asked to be discharged against medical advice as well. Because what I understood then, too, is that I was a patient, but I was also a paying customer. Because although I had insurance, I had copays. And I think patients don't understand. Even if you have insurance, you are still a paying customer. And the way our capitalist society works, even in medicine, if you threaten to take your business someplace else, that hospital is losing out on money. And they don't want to lose money more than they don't actually want to lose the patient. And once I said, I'm not having my baby in this room, magically, and I mean magically, my birthing room was as big as my bedroom. And I was in a comfortable place to have my child. And I was prepared to leave the hospital because there was just no way. So I think this is true for a lot of Black mothers. And I think it's probably why we die in childbirth. And to some degree, our children aren't as healthy. I think to what the doctor just said, toxic stress, it's a horrible time to be that stressed when you're about to give birth.
Yeah. And for the audience, I applaud Rochelle for getting a second opinion. I applaud Tammy for standing up for her rights, because there are patient rights. And if you feel that your doctor is not listening, you have the right to get a second opinion. Don't wait till things get, even worse, because you don't want to be in that predicament. You are valuable, and you have the right to equitable care.
Right.
And it's concerning because, you all, the two of you, Tammy and Rochelle, are educated women, strong women who use your voice. There are a lot of young women who are giving birth, or women who may not have as much education or may not have found their voice, that cannot advocate for themselves. And wonder what your two scenarios would have been if you did not have, the what you have in the backbone that you have. What would have been the difference in the outcome?
True.
And the disparities also exist or arise.
Right.
I think if you don't have the voice and you don't have the education, it's always good to get somebody to help advocate for you.
Mm-hmm.
Not, outside of yourself. Get an advocate that knows about healthcare if you can, a friend or somebody knowledgeable that can be there for you in tough situations.
But I also think that speaks to the healthcare system in itself. I totally agree. I think, if you can have someone advocate for you. But again, I think it goes back to how our systems are designed, our healthcare systems designed, where it makes it so that we're putting our patients on the defensive and not in a position where it's a mutual respected relationship, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we really have to look at how we're going to move forward, right, with these challenges. Because again, both you, Rochelle and Tammy, the fact that you each have stories, and we know that there are more women who have similar stories, right? There's a pattern here, right? There's evidence to say that we need to do something different, and the time is now. And again,
Right.
I'm so sorry that those experiences happened to you, but I'm also happy that you all had had healthy infants despite or in spite of the healthcare systems.
Right. Ladies, it's been such a pleasure as we reach the top of the Diversity Connects Us hour. We want to thank every single one of you for leading this informational conversation. Thank you so much for everything you have shared. It was a great pleasure to have you. This podcast highlights lived experiences and inspirational stories of strength and tenacity. We will share profound and courageous dialogue that influence DEI by breaking the barriers and labels of stereotypes, confronting biases, and offering best practices to achieve a more significant and cultural mindset. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
It was such a pleasure.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Next week, we won't be airing, but we will come back on March 29th with Dr. Duget as we talk about race and children.
Oh, yes. That's a great one.
Yeah, that's a good one. I'm so excited for that one.
Yes, I think I'm going to listen in too, because the long-term effects are amazing, how it affects our health all the way through. So
It does. And Tammy, is there anything you want to share with the audience?
So also on the 17th of this month, both Rochelle and I are actually going to be doing webinars on the Superwoman Syndrome. And Dr. Lopes talked a little bit about this, and this is especially plagues Black and brown women, the Superwoman Syndrome, that we feel like we have to be everything to everyone all the time, at home, at work, in our profession. And so we're doing a webinar series, and tickets will be available for that soon, but that's something we both have been working on, and we are excited to bring that to you guys.
It's great.
thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.